I once believed life had finally balanced itself. After years of endless struggle, heartbreak, and uncertainty, I thought I had reached a haven of stability. Simone and I had crafted a life together in Portland, a city where the rain washed away yesterday's troubles, leaving room for new beginnings. But lately, even the rain felt heavy, lingering too long, much like the silences between us. Our home, nestled on a quiet street lined with maple trees, was a testament to the life we had built. Photos from vacations in Italy and Japan adorned the walls, while the faint scent of lavender candles lingered in the air. Every corner whispered a story of shared joy. Yet, beneath that curated perfection, something was unraveling. Simone had changed, or maybe I had. It was subtle at first, like a faint breeze before a storm. Her laughter, once spontaneous and vibrant, became rehearsed, as if performed for someone else's benefit. Her touch, which used to linger on my arm, now felt brief and obligatory. I convinced myself it was just the grind of her demanding career, a passing phase that all marriages endured. But deep down, the doubt gnawed at me. One evening, while flipping through a magazine at the dining table, I noticed Simone sitting on the couch, engrossed in her phone. Her smile caught my attention, a rare, genuine smile. It wasn't the kind of smile she had shared with me lately. "Simone," I said, trying to mask the unease in my voice. She looked up, startled, her phone slipping slightly from her grasp. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," she replied too quickly, her tone defensive. "Just work emails." Her answer should have reassured me, but it didn't. That smile wasn't meant for work. The next morning, I found myself staring at an unfamiliar receipt in our kitchen drawer. It was from a boutique restaurant downtown, a place we'd never been together. The date on the receipt was from last Thursday, a night she'd told me she was working late at the office. My stomach churned, but I shoved the receipt back, trying to shake the creeping thoughts. Surely there was an explanation. I wanted to trust her. I needed to. But trust is fragile, and mine was beginning to crack. Simone started coming home later, often with vague excuses. One evening, as she stepped through the door, her hair slightly disheveled and her cheeks flushed, I asked, "Long day at work?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for doubt to creep in. "Yeah, long meetings, you know how it is." But I didn't, because when I pressed further, she turned away, her voice sharp. "Callum, can we not do this? I'm tired." Her tiredness wasn't just physical, it was emotional, and it was directed at me. A week later, while cleaning out her car, I found a neatly folded scarf on the passenger seat. It wasn't hers. Simone despised scarves, claiming they were suffocating. When I asked her about it, she shrugged. "Probably a coworker's. I gave someone a ride after work." Her explanation hung in the air, brittle and hollow. I wanted to believe her, desperately. But belief without proof is like a building without a foundation. It collapses under its own weight. The final blow came one rainy Friday night. She had left for a supposed work dinner, and I, restless and uneasy, decided to take a walk to clear my head. As I passed by a cafe downtown, my gaze landed on a familiar figure. Simone sat by the window laughing, her hand lightly resting on a man's forearm. The intimacy in their exchange froze me in place. It felt like an eternity before I could move again. I turned away, the rain masking the tears streaming down my face. I wanted to confront her that night, but instead, I found myself staring at our wedding photo on the mantelpiece. Her smile in that picture had once been my solace, my anchor. Now it felt like a lie. The cafe window haunted me for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Simone's laughter, the kind of uninhibited joy I hadn't witnessed in months. Her hand on his arm, the way their bodies leaned toward each other like gravity had drawn them together. I couldn't shake it no matter how hard I tried. The following evening, Simone walked through the front door with a cheerful, "Hey!" as if nothing had happened. She set her bag on the counter, her smile fleeting when she met my gaze. "How was the dinner?" I asked, keeping my tone casual, though my stomach churned with unease. "It was fine, long but productive." She didn't look at me as she spoke, busying herself with untying her shoes. "Barrett was there. He's such a show-off. You'd hate him." "Barrett?" The name of the man in the cafe. My fists clenched involuntarily, but I quickly forced them open. Is that so? She laughed lightly, as if trying to diffuse the tension she could sense but not yet name. Yeah, he's always bragging about something. Anyway, I'm exhausted. Mind if I crash early? Of course, I replied, my voice tight. You must be tired from all the productivity. Simone hesitated for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly, but she didn't press further. She nodded and retreated upstairs, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Later that night, I paced the living room, staring at the framed photos that once felt like anchors in my life. Now they mocked me. Her smile, once my refuge, now felt like a carefully constructed mask. I hated that I was starting to doubt her every word, her every action. Was I being paranoid? Or had the foundation of my life been a lie all along? The next morning, as Simone showered, I stood at the kitchen counter staring at her phone charging on the counter. The screen lit up suddenly, displaying a notification. Barrett L. My heart pounded as I instinctively reached for it, but I stopped myself. What was I doing? Was this who I had become? A man driven to snooping through his wife's phone for answers? I left the phone untouched, but the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew with every passing moment. Later that day, while cleaning out the laundry, I noticed a faint scent on her blouse, something musky and unfamiliar. It wasn't my cologne. My pulse quickened as I brought the fabric closer to my nose, the realization hitting me like a blow. The final crack came when I picked up her coat from the hall closet. A crumpled receipt tumbled out of the pocket. It was from the same boutique restaurant downtown. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine. The date aligned perfectly with one of her late meetings. I sank into the couch, the receipt trembling in my hands. Every logical part of me screamed for patience, for clarity, but my emotions were a storm. Anger, sadness, fear. They churned within me, each one fighting for dominance. When Simone came home that night, I couldn't meet her gaze. I watched her move through the house with an ease I envied. How could she pretend everything was fine? How could she look at me and not see the unraveling happening inside? I decided to take action. The next day, after Simone left for work, I called an old friend, Dean, a private investigator I hadn't spoken to in years. Callum Rains, Dean's voice boomed on the other end. To what do I owe this pleasure? It's not pleasure, Dean, I said, my voice shaking slightly. I need your help, and I need you to be discreet. There was a long pause before he responded. This about Simone? Yes. Dean sighed heavily, but his tone was steady. All right, send me whatever you've got, and I'll take care of the rest. As I ended the call, a weight lifted slightly from my chest. For the first time in weeks, I had done something proactive. I wasn't just drowning in suspicion anymore, I was searching for the truth. But with truth comes consequences, and deep down I feared the truth might destroy me. The moment came sooner than I had expected. Dean had worked faster than I could have imagined, and by the end of the week he handed me a neatly compiled folder filled with evidence. Photos, timestamps, receipts. Each piece felt like a dagger carving into what little hope I had left. The night Simone came home, I was sitting in the living room, the folder on the coffee table in front of me. My hands rested on my knees, clenched tightly as if holding myself together. The air felt charged, heavy with words unsaid. Callum? She called out as she stepped through the door. Her voice, so familiar yet distant, echoed in the silence. Why are all the lights off? In here, I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. She entered the room, hesitating when she saw me sitting in the semi-darkness. Is everything okay? She asked cautiously, her smile faltering. Sit down, I said, motioning to the chair across from me. Her brow furrowed, but she complied, dropping her purse onto the floor. What's going on? For a moment, I didn't speak. I stared at her, searching her face for a flicker of guilt, an ounce of regret. But all I saw was confusion, or perhaps the mask she wore so expertly. Who's Barrett Longfield? I asked finally, my voice steady but low. Simone blinked, her lips parting slightly. What are you talking about? I think you know exactly what I'm talking about, I said, reaching for the folder and tossing it onto the table. The papers spilled out like an avalanche, exposing her secrets. She stared at them, her face pale. Callum, this isn't what it looks like. Oh, really? I leaned forward, my voice rising. Because it looks like you've been spending late nights, fancy dinners, and God knows what else with another man while I've been here trusting you. Her eyes darted to the photos, the receipts. Her hands trembled as she tried to gather the papers, as if she could somehow erase the evidence by hiding it. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice cracking. "Then tell me what it is." I stood abruptly, towering over her. "Explain to me how I'm supposed to believe in us when you're sneaking around with him." Simone's composure crumbled. Tears streamed down her face as she buried her head in her hands. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered, barely audible. "I was lonely, Callum. You've been so distant, so consumed by work. I felt invisible." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "So it's my fault?" I asked bitterly. "You felt neglected, so instead of talking to me, you turned to him." "I didn't want to hurt you," she sobbed. "I didn't think it would go this far." "But it did," I said, my voice cold. "And now we're here." For a long moment, the only sound was her quiet sobbing. I wanted to feel anger, rage, but all I felt was hollow, like something inside me had been irreparably broken. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes red and pleading. "Callum, I love you, I swear I do. Please, we can fix this. We can go to counseling, try to rebuild." I shook my head slowly. "You can't rebuild something that's already crumbled to dust, Simone. Love doesn't survive betrayal." Her face crumpled and she reached for my hand, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said, my voice firm. "I can't do this right now." Without another word, I walked past her, out the door, and into the cool night air. The world felt silent, like it was holding its breath. I stood there, staring up at the stars, wondering how everything had fallen apart so quickly. The following day, I woke to the hollow stillness of a house that no longer felt like home. The confrontation with Simone replayed in my mind, her tear-streaked face, her shaky words. I didn't mean for it to happen. But intention didn't erase betrayal. It didn't erase the ache in my chest that felt like something vital had been ripped away. Dean called that morning. "Callum, I've got the final pieces. You ready for this?" His words carried the weight of inevitability. "Just tell me. You should see it for yourself," he said. "I'll email everything over. It's conclusive." Minutes later, my inbox pinged. I opened the file and stared at the screen, my heart pounding as image after image loaded. There she was. Simone laughing, leaning into Barrett's touch at a dimly lit bar. Another photo, Simone stepping into his car, her hand resting on his arm. The timestamps were damning, aligning perfectly with nights she claimed to be working late. I scrolled further, my breath catching at the sight of her entering a hotel lobby with him, their fingers interlaced. My stomach churned as the next image showed them leaving hours later, her hair disheveled, his jacket draped over her shoulders. The final photo was the worst. It was of them sitting on a park bench, Barrett's arm wrapped around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. There was no mistaking the intimacy, the ease between them. It wasn't just an affair. It was a connection, a bond she had never shown me in months, perhaps years. I slammed the laptop shut, unable to look anymore. The pain was no longer just a dull ache. It was sharp, raw, suffocating. Every promise we'd made, every memory we'd shared now felt tainted. I reached for my phone, dialing Dean. "It's more than enough," I said, my voice hoarse. "Thank you." "Callum," he said hesitantly. "I hate to ask, but what are you going to do?" I didn't have an answer. I stared out the window at the gray Portland sky, the rain streaking down like tears on glass. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I can't let this slide." That evening, Simone returned home, her usual cheerful facade firmly in place. "Hey," she said, kicking off her heels. "Dinner smells good." I didn't respond, my back to her as I stirred the pot on the stove. My silence must have registered because she hesitated. "Callum, is everything okay?" "Why don't you tell me, Simone?" I said, turning to face her. My voice was calm, measured, but the tension was unmistakable. Her brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" I picked up the folder Dean had delivered earlier and placed it on the counter between us. "This, care to explain?" Her face paled as she opened the folder, her hands trembling as she flipped through the photos. "Callum, don't," I interrupted, my voice rising. "Don't insult me by pretending there's an explanation for this." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't soften. "I trusted you, Simone. I gave you everything I had, and this is how you repay me? It wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't want it to." "But it did," I snapped, "and you let it, over and over again. You lied to my face, Simone. Every late meeting, every excuse, you looked me in the eyes and lied." Her tears fell freely now, but they did nothing to ease the anger, the hurt that roared inside me. "Callum, I still love you," she said desperately. "It was a mistake, a terrible mistake, but it doesn't have to end us." I laughed bitterly. "Love? You call this love? You destroyed us, Simone. You don't get to decide what happens now." Her sobs filled the silence as I turned away, my hands gripping the counter to steady myself. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice hollow. "I need space. Don't expect me to be here when you wake up." I grabbed my keys and left, the sound of her cries following me out the door. The motel room was suffocating, even with the window cracked open to let in the chill of Portland's late autumn air. I hadn't slept. My mind replayed every word, every tear from the night before. The anger had cooled, but the ache remained, a dull, persistent reminder of everything I had lost. By morning, I made a decision. I needed to know why. Not the surface-level excuses Simone had offered in her tears, but the truth. The raw, unvarnished truth that would either help me make sense of it all or destroy me completely. Simone answered the door after the third knock, her face pale, her eyes red and swollen. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by guilt and exhaustion. "Callum," she whispered as if saying my name hurt her. "I need answers," I said, stepping past her into the house. It no longer felt like home, just a collection of walls that had witnessed too many lies. "And I need you to be honest with me. No more tears, no more excuses." She closed the door and turned to face me, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. "I'll try," she said quietly. I sat on the edge of the couch, my hands clasped tightly together. "When did it start?" Her breath hitched and she looked down at the floor. "About 8 months ago," she admitted. "It was after our anniversary." Our anniversary. The night I had surprised her with reservations at the restaurant where we'd had our first date. The night she had smiled and held my hand as if nothing was wrong. "Why?" I asked, my voice low and raw. "What did I do or not do that made you turn to him?" "It wasn't about you," she said quickly, her words tumbling over each other. "It was me. I felt lost, like I didn't matter anymore. You were always working, always distracted. I'd talk, but it felt like you weren't really listening." "I was working for us," I snapped, the bitterness bleeding through. "To give us the life we wanted, to build something for our future." "I know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "And I'm not saying it's your fault. I felt invisible, Callum. And then Barrett came along and he saw me. He made me feel wanted." Her words stung, each one a needle pricking my already fragile sense of self. "So what was I, Simone?" I demanded. "A placeholder? A safety net while you played house with someone else?" "No," she cried, stepping closer, her hands outstretched as if to reach for me. But I didn't move. "I love you. I've always loved you. I made a mistake. A terrible, horrible mistake." "A mistake," I repeated, my voice rising. "A mistake is forgetting our anniversary. A mistake is burning dinner. What you did, what you chose to do over and over again, wasn't a mistake, Simone. It was a decision." She crumpled under the weight of my words, sinking into the armchair across from me. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. "I don't even know if I can." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She wasn't the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago, but maybe I wasn't the man she had married either. Somewhere along the way we had lost each other, and neither of us had noticed until it was too late. "You can't fix this," I said finally, my voice steady but hollow. "Some things, once broken, can't be put back together." Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't offer her comfort. I couldn't. I had nothing left to give. "I'll start looking for a place," she said after a long silence, her voice trembling. "I don't want to make this harder for you." I stood, my legs heavy, my heart heavier. "Do what you need to do," I said, heading for the door. "But don't expect me to wait around for another apology." As I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a slap, sharp and unforgiving. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here. Not in this house, not in this life we had built on a foundation of lies. The road stretched endlessly before me, a gray ribbon winding through dense forests and rolling hills. The rain had followed me from Portland, a persistent drizzle that blurred the scenery and matched the storm raging inside me. My destination? Asheville, North Carolina, a place I hadn't seen in years, but one that still felt like a sanctuary in my mind. I'd called Yvonne the day after leaving Simone, my voice hesitant as I asked if I could visit. She didn't ask questions, just welcomed me with the warmth she'd always shown. "Of course, Callum, we'd love to see you," she said, her voice a balm to my frayed nerves. The Leclercs had been my lifeline once, pulling me out of a darkness I couldn't escape on my own. Yvonne had become the mother I never had. And Margot was the sister I never knew I needed. Or at least that's what I told myself. Now, years later, I was returning, not as the confident man who had built a career and a life, but as someone shattered, searching for pieces of himself in the echoes of his past. I arrived at their modest home just as dusk settled over the mountains. The porch light flickered on, casting a warm glow that seemed to reach out and wrap around me. Yvonne opened the door before I could knock, her face lighting up with a smile that erased years of distance. "Callum," she said, pulling me into a tight embrace. She felt frail, but her presence was as strong as ever. "It's been too long." "I'm sorry for that," I murmured, my voice thick with emotion. "None of that," she said, pulling back to look at me. "You're here now, and that's all that matters." Inside, the house smelled of lavender and fresh bread, a comforting contrast to the turmoil I carried with me. Margot appeared moments later, her dark hair pulled back into a loose braid. She froze when she saw me, her green eyes wide with surprise. "Callum," she breathed, her voice soft but tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "Hey, Margot," I said, a faint smile tugging at my lips. Her hesitation melted and she stepped forward to hug me. "It's good to see you," she said, her voice steadier now. "We missed you." The evening passed in a haze of familiar stories and shared laughter, but as the night deepened, so did the weight of my thoughts. Yvonne had retired to bed early, leaving Margot and me sitting in the dimly lit living room. She studied me carefully, her gaze unyielding. "You're not here just for a visit, are you?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "No, things fell apart back home." "Simone?" she guessed, her voice quiet. I nodded, the word catching in my throat. "She betrayed me, and now I don't know who I am without her." Margot's expression softened, and she reached for my hand. "You're still you, Callum. Even if it feels like everything's crumbling, you're still the man who came here years ago and became part of our family. You're still the man who built something incredible from nothing." Her words struck a chord, but they didn't ease the ache in my chest. "I don't know how to move forward," I admitted. "I keep looking back, trying to figure out where I went wrong." Margot tilted her head, her eyes thoughtful. "Maybe it's not about where you went wrong. Maybe it's about what comes next. Sometimes you have to let the past go to see what the future holds." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of something I couldn't quite name. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just the faintest spark of clarity. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Margot smiled, squeezing my hand. "You're not alone in this, Callum. Remember that." That night, as I lay in the guest room staring at the ceiling, Margot's words echoed in my mind. Maybe it wasn't about fixing the past. Maybe it was about building something new, something stronger. The morning air in Asheville carried a crispness that hinted at the changing season. I found myself awake early, sitting on the back porch with a steaming cup of coffee. The mountains stretched out before me, their peaks shrouded in mist. It was peaceful here, but peace had become an unfamiliar companion. Margot joined me not long after, a blanket draped over her shoulders and a mug in her hands. We sat in silence for a while, letting the stillness speak for us. But when the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the calm, I turned to her with a questioning look. "Julian and Lisa are here," she said with a small smile. "I told them you'd be staying for a while." The name Lisa sent a jolt through me, though I wasn't sure why. I hadn't seen her in years, not since she left for medical school. She had been a bright, determined presence back then, someone who always seemed to carry the weight of the world with quiet strength. When she stepped through the door, that strength was still there, but it was tempered with something softer, more mature. Her dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and her emerald eyes, so much like Yvonne's, lit up when she saw me. "Callum," she said, her voice warm as she wrapped me in a hug. "It's been too long." "It has," I replied, surprised at how natural it felt to hold her, how easily the years melted away. As the day wore on, Lisa's presence became a constant grounding force. She moved through the house with ease, helping Yvonne with small tasks, sharing quiet conversations with Margot. But it was in the moments we found ourselves alone that I began to see her in a new light. That evening, as the others prepared dinner, Lisa and I found ourselves walking along a narrow trail that wound through the woods behind the house. The canopy above us filtered the fading sunlight, casting golden shadows on the forest floor. "You're quieter than I remember," she said, her tone gentle. "What's on your mind?" "Everything," I admitted. "Coming back here, it stirred up a lot. And with Simone..." I trailed off, the weight of her name making it hard to continue. Lisa stopped and turned to face me, her expression earnest. "Callum, you don't have to carry all of this alone. You're allowed to lean on people who care about you." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I looked away, staring at the ground. "I don't even know who I am anymore," I said quietly. "Simone's betrayal. It's made me question everything. My choices, my worth, my future. I don't know how to move forward." She stepped closer, her voice steady but full of compassion. "You move forward one step at a time, and when it feels too hard, you let someone walk beside you." I met her gaze, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. There was something in her eyes, a sincerity, a quiet strength that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. We walked in silence after that, the unspoken connection between us growing with every step. By the time we returned to the house, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky streaked with shades of pink and orange. The warmth of the Leclerc's home greeted us, but it was Lisa's quiet presence that stayed with me long after the others had gone to bed. Lying awake in the guest room, I replayed our conversation, the way she had looked at me, her words resonating deep within. I wasn't sure what it meant or where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time I felt like I wasn't alone. The plane landed back in Portland with a harsh jolt, the wheels touching down with an unexpected thud that matched the weight in my chest. For the first time since I'd left, I wasn't sure what I was returning to. I had come to Asheville seeking answers, and in the quiet conversations with Lisa, with Margot, and with myself, I had found some semblance of peace. But peace didn't pay the bills, and it didn't heal a broken heart. The airport terminal was bustling, full of people rushing to and from their destinations, oblivious to the storm that had left me adrift. I grabbed my bag and walked out into the cold, the familiar chill of the Portland air seeping into my bones, grounding me in a reality I wasn't sure I was ready for. Home. But it wasn't home anymore. At least, it didn't feel like it. I stepped into the house, the door creaking in protest, and immediately the silence hit me. The kind of silence that only comes when everything you thought was permanent has been shattered. The walls felt emptier now, the rooms echoing with the absence of Simone. I ran my hand across the back of the couch where we used to sit together, the spots where we'd laughed, argued, and shared our lives. It all seemed so distant, as though it belonged to someone else. There was a message waiting for me on my phone, and I felt my stomach tighten before I even saw who it was from. Simone. "Callum, I need to talk to you. Please. I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say, but I need to explain. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keypad. What was there left to say? What explanation could she possibly give that would undo the last few weeks, that would erase the pictures, the lies, the betrayal? But even as I stood there, the decision felt heavier than ever. Could I really just close the door on everything? Was there a part of me that still wanted to believe her? To believe that we could somehow make it work? I pressed my thumb down and typed back one simple message. We need to talk. I didn't know what would come from it. I didn't know if the answers I sought would heal or destroy me, but I knew that the next few hours would change everything. I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, my thoughts racing as I waited for her to arrive. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, its sound unnervingly loud in the stillness. When the doorbell rang, it felt like the weight of 1,000 moments, each one leading to this one. Simone stood at the door when I opened it, her face pale, her eyes raw from what I could only guess were days of sleeplessness. She looked smaller than I remembered, defeated in a way I hadn't seen before. I don't know where to start, she said, her voice trembling. I know I don't deserve any of this, but I— Sit down, I interrupted. I wasn't angry anymore. I was exhausted, drained by everything that had happened. She sat across from me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, the silence hanging heavy between us. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said quietly, and I don't know if I want to. Her eyes filled with tears and she wiped them away quickly, trying to regain some semblance of control. I don't expect you to, she whispered, but I need you to know, it wasn't about you. It was never about you. I wasn't thinking, and I let something I thought would fill the emptiness, destroy everything. Simone, I said, my voice thick with emotion, I gave you everything, my trust, my life, and you. I couldn't finish the sentence. The words were stuck, choked by the pain of it all. I was selfish, she whispered. I was scared. I thought if I could just feel something again, if I could find a way to make myself feel wanted. But I hurt you, and I'm so sorry. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know either, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if it can be fixed. The tears in her eyes mirrored the ones in my own. We both knew deep down that this conversation was just the beginning of something we couldn't undo. The path forward, if there was one, would be long and painful, and there was no guarantee that either of us would survive it unscathed. Callum, she said, her voice fragile. I love you, I always have. I never meant to hurt you. I stood up, unable to sit any longer, my body too tense with the weight of the decision that still loomed. I need space, I said. I need time to figure out if we're even still us. Simone nodded, tears falling freely now. I understand. I walked out of the kitchen, the sound of her sobs following me as I stepped into the living room, staring out the window. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the floor. The house felt colder now, but as much as it hurt, as much as I longed to go back to the life we had, I knew that the reality I was returning to was no longer the one I had left. The days that followed were a blur of restless nights and quiet, empty mornings. I had thought I'd made my peace with everything, but as each hour passed, the weight of my decision grew heavier. Simone's pleading, the uncertainty in her eyes when she looked at me, it all tangled up with the image of Lisa's quiet strength. I could still feel her presence in my mind, like a thread pulling me toward something I didn't understand. I spent my time trying to sort through the wreckage, but no matter how much I analyzed the situation, I couldn't escape the one truth that kept knocking on my door. I had to choose, and I didn't know which choice would destroy me more, the one that hurt the least or the one that hurt the most. Simone called me again the next day, her voice cracking on the other end of the line. Please, Callum, I can't lose you. But it wasn't just about losing me. It was about losing the life I thought we had, the trust we built, and the future I once imagined for us. Simone, I said, my voice hoarse, I don't know what's left to fix. I need to know. Do you still want this, us? There was a long silence before she spoke. I don't know how to undo what I've done, but I want to try. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to show you I'm still here, that I'm still trying." The words felt like a dagger to my chest. I could hear the desperation in her voice, but I could also hear the truth buried within. She had made her choice long before I ever found out, and now she was asking me to undo the past, to forgive, to forget. But how do you rebuild something that's already crumbled into dust? I hung up the phone, letting the weight of the silence settle over me. I walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked street, the world outside as gray as the storm in my heart. The questions piled up in my mind. Could I stay with her? Could I forgive her? Could I live with the scar that would never heal? Then, almost without thinking, I found myself dialing a number I hadn't expected to call. "Callum?" Lisa answered, her voice cautious, as if she too was unsure where we stood. "I need to talk to you," I said, the words falling out before I could stop them. "I'll be there," she replied. The simple words sounded like a lifeline. When she arrived, there was no pretense, no awkwardness. She looked at me with an understanding in her eyes, the same understanding she had shown when I first opened up to her. We didn't need to say much. The space between us was filled with everything I couldn't put into words. "I don't know what I'm doing, Lisa," I admitted, my voice breaking as I let out a shaky breath. "I'm torn between trying to fix what's broken and walking away from it all." Lisa moved closer, her presence grounding me. "You don't have to decide right now, Callum. You don't owe anyone a decision until you're ready. But I need you to ask yourself one thing. What do you want? What did I want?" For the first time in what felt like forever, the question hung in the air, suspended between us. What did I want? To fix things with Simone? To rebuild something that had already been shattered? Or to let go, to move forward, to build something new, something real? I closed my eyes, the weight of it all pressing down on me. "I want peace," I whispered. Lisa's hand rested gently on mine. "Then you need to give yourself permission to find it, whatever that looks like." The words struck a chord deep within me, and for the first time, I felt like I could breathe again. The tension in my chest began to ease, and though I knew the path ahead would still be difficult, I no longer felt trapped by the choices before me. I didn't have to save everyone. I didn't have to carry this burden alone. "I don't know where this will lead," I said, my voice quiet. "But I need to be honest with myself. I need to stop pretending everything is okay when it's not." "You will," she said softly, her gaze unwavering. "And no matter what, I'm here. But it's your decision, Callum. You have the power to choose your path." I nodded, feeling something shift within me. The weight hadn't disappeared, but it was lighter now. I was starting to see the edges of a future I could own, something that wasn't defined by past mistakes or betrayal. The decision was mine, and I was finally ready to make it. The phone call came early in the morning, the kind that shatters sleep and leaves a cold, sinking feeling in your stomach. Yvonne's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried an urgency that pulled me from my bed before the first light of day. "Callum," she said, her voice quivering. "It's time. Angela, she doesn't have much longer." I stood frozen, the weight of her words pressing down on me. Angela had always been strong, too strong it seemed, to be brought down by something as mundane as time. Yet now, time was slipping away from her, and there was nothing any of us could do to stop it. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys, pulled on a jacket, and drove straight to Asheville without a second thought. Each mile felt like a small eternity, the road stretching out before me as I tried to prepare myself for what was coming. When I arrived, the house was quieter than I remembered. The air inside felt thick, heavy with an unspoken grief that clung to the walls. Yvonne was standing by the door, her face tired but resolute, as if she had already come to terms with the inevitable. "She's in the living room," Yvonne said softly, stepping aside to let me in. "She asked for you." I followed her down the hall, each step feeling like a march toward an uncertain end. When I entered the living room, Angela was lying in her favorite armchair, the same chair where she had always sat with a book in her hand, her eyes sparkling with knowledge and warmth. Now her skin was pale, her frailty unmistakable. The woman who had once held the world together for her children now seemed like a shadow of herself, barely clinging to the life she had known. "Callum," she whispered, her voice raspy but familiar. "I'm glad you came." I knelt beside her, taking her hand in mine. The warmth of her skin was a stark contrast to the coldness in the room. "I wouldn't be anywhere else," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You've been like a mother to me, Angela. I don't know what I would have done without you." She smiled faintly, her eyes fluttering shut for a moment, as if savoring the simple comfort of the moment. "I've always believed in you, Callum," she murmured, her grip tightening ever so slightly. "You've always had the strength to rise above no matter what life throws at you. But don't let it break you." Her words struck deep, resonating with the pain and uncertainty that had consumed me in recent days. She had always been the one to offer guidance, to remind me that no matter how difficult life became, I had the ability to endure. But now, as she lay there, slipping away from me, I realized how much of that strength I had taken for granted. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, Angela," I whispered. "I don't know what the next step is." She opened her eyes, her gaze steady and filled with a depth that only someone who had lived a lifetime could possess. "You will," she said softly, "but you must choose your path. No one else can do that for you." I nodded, the weight of her words sinking into me. She had always believed in me, even when I couldn't believe in myself. She had seen something in me that I wasn't sure I could see in myself anymore. There was a long silence, the kind that fills a room with everything unsaid, and then Angela spoke again, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Take care of Margot and Lisa," she said, her eyes meeting mine with the intensity of someone who knew their time was running out. "They'll need you, Callum, and you need them too." A wave of emotion washed over me, and I found myself fighting back tears. How could I be the one to step up, to be the man she had always believed in, when everything inside me felt broken? But Angela's steady gaze never wavered, and in that moment I realized she was giving me something I had never fully accepted: permission to move forward, to let go of the past, and to embrace the future, no matter how uncertain it seemed. "I will," I promised, my voice trembling. "I'll take care of them." Her smile was small but full of peace, as if she had finally found the calm she had been searching for. "I know you will," she said softly. I stayed with her for hours, holding her hand, sharing quiet words until her breathing slowed, until the light in her eyes faded into something more peaceful. She was gone, but her last wish, her unwavering belief in me, stayed behind. And for the first time in a long time I felt a glimmer of hope, a quiet strength in the face of everything I had lost. It was in the quiet moments after Angela's passing that the world felt most alive. It was as if the very earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to decide what came next. Margot and Lisa had always been the quiet constants in my life, their presence grounding me even when I didn't realize it. But now I couldn't deny that something had shifted between us. There was a subtle tension in the air, something unspoken but undeniable. I stood on the porch, the night enveloping the house, the stars hidden behind a veil of clouds. I had spent the day with Margot and Lisa, helping them with the arrangements, but the weight of everything still hung heavy on my shoulders. The rawness of Angela's last wish, the one that had cut through my fear and uncertainty, was like a beacon guiding me forward. Lisa stepped outside, a glass of wine in hand, her gaze soft but intent. Her presence had always been steady, like the calm in the storm, and tonight it felt like I needed her more than I cared to admit. "Callum," she said quietly, her voice breaking through the silence, "I'm glad you're here. I don't know what I would have done without you these past few days." Her words, though simple, struck a chord deep inside me. I turned to face her, my heart heavy with emotions I hadn't quite processed. "I didn't want to be here," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to run. I wanted to leave it all behind." Lisa's eyes searched mine, her expression understanding but not pitying. "But you stayed," she said, her voice soft with the weight of her own grief. "And that matters." It did. It mattered in ways I hadn't fully grasped until now. I had stayed not just for them, not just for Angela, but for myself too. Maybe it wasn't about forgetting the past. Maybe it was about learning to live with it, to honor the people who had shaped me, and to understand that sometimes moving forward didn't mean erasing what had come before. The silence stretched between us, comfortable yet filled with unsaid words. Finally, I spoke again, my voice steady but thick with emotion. "I've spent so much time running, Lisa, running from the pain, running from the truth, running from you." The words spilled out before I could stop them. I hadn't meant to say that last part, but it had been true for far too long. Lisa stood still, her gaze never leaving mine. "And what if you stopped running?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. "What if you stayed here, in this moment, with me?" I felt my breath catch in my throat. It was like everything I had been avoiding, everything I had been afraid to face, had come to a head. In the dim light of the porch, with the soft rustle of leaves in the distance, I realized something I had been too afraid to admit for years. The person I had been running from wasn't just Simone or the pain of the past. It was myself. The person I was before everything had fallen apart. The person I thought I could never be again. I stepped closer to Lisa, drawn to her in a way that felt both inevitable and terrifying. "I don't know if I'm ready," I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. "You don't have to be ready," she replied softly, her hand reaching out to touch mine. "But you have to decide if you want to be." The words sank in like stones thrown into still water, rippling through me with an intensity that left me breathless. She wasn't asking for promises or declarations. She was asking for me, for the man I was now, not the man I thought I should be. I looked at her, the quiet strength in her eyes pulling me in. There was no more room for hesitation. I had spent far too long trying to outrun my own heart, trying to bury the connection I felt with her under layers of fear and doubt. But in this moment, with Angela's death hanging in the air like a shadow, I understood that sometimes the only way to move forward was to surrender to what was real. With a deep breath, I took her hand fully in mine, feeling the warmth of it, the steady rhythm of her pulse. Maybe it's time I stopped running. And for the first time in so long, I didn't feel like I was making a decision out of desperation. I felt like I was finally choosing something that was mine, not something forced upon me, not something dictated by fear, but something I wanted, something I needed. Lisa smiled, a soft, knowing smile, and for a brief moment everything felt right. The weight that had been pressing on my chest, the uncertainty about the future, all seemed to fade away, replaced by the quiet peace of knowing that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't alone. The day had ended quietly, the kind of evening where nothing particularly extraordinary happens, yet everything feels significant. The weight of the past few weeks had begun to lift, just a little. Lisa and I had spent the afternoon walking through the woods behind our family's house, our footsteps quiet on the damp earth. I had been avoiding the truth for so long, running, pretending it wasn't there. But today, something had shifted. I felt lighter, as though I was finally breathing again. The sun began to set as we stood on the veranda, the sky painted with hues of purple, orange, and deepening blue. Lisa was beside me, her hand resting lightly on the railing, her gaze fixed on the horizon. There was a quiet beauty in the way the day was fading into night. It felt like the right moment to say something I had been holding on to for too long, something that had been growing inside me, demanding to be expressed. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady but full of meaning. She turned to me, her eyes searching mine. "Ready for what?" "To stop running," I said, taking a deep breath. "I've been running from the past, from my mistakes, from the choices I made, from everything that hurt me. But I can't keep doing it, not anymore." Lisa's expression softened, and she took a step closer, her hand brushing against mine. "And where does that leave us?" I paused, the silence stretching between us. I could hear the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, the distant call of a bird, but the world seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for me to answer. It wasn't an easy question, and it wasn't one I could answer lightly. But for the first time, I felt like I had the courage to face it. "I don't know what comes next," I said quietly, "but I want to figure it out with you. I want to try something real." The words felt like a weight lifting from my chest. I hadn't realized how badly I needed to say them until they were out in the open. Lisa's smile was small but full of warmth. Her fingers curled around mine, her touch grounding me in a way that nothing else had. "I'm here," she said softly. "Whenever you're ready." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the porch, and for a brief moment everything felt suspended in time, as if the world was waiting for us to take the next step. But it wasn't fear I felt. It was hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild what I had broken. Hope that I could allow myself to feel again without the weight of guilt or fear holding me back. And then, just as the last sliver of sunlight vanished behind the mountains, something extraordinary happened. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable. A brief flicker of green on the horizon, a flash of light that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Lisa's eyes widened, and she gasped, stepping closer to the edge of the veranda. "The green flash," she whispered in awe. I followed her gaze, staring into the sky where the final rays of the sun met the edge of the earth. There it was again, a brilliant flash of green, a brief moment of brilliance that seemed to capture the very essence of the universe. It lasted only a few seconds, but in that moment, everything felt right, like the world had shifted, realigned, and now I was exactly where I was meant to be. I turned to Lisa, who was still watching the horizon, her eyes reflecting the glow of the fleeting moment. "What does it mean?" I asked quietly, though I wasn't sure I even needed the answer. She smiled, her gaze soft but filled with a knowing that went beyond words. "Some people say it's a sign, a rare moment when everything aligns perfectly, when you see the world as it truly is without the distractions or the hurt. A turning point, maybe. A turning point." The words lingered in the air, and I realized they weren't just about the flash in the sky. They were about me, about us, and about the future I had finally started to believe was possible. For the first time, I wasn't trapped by the past or by fear. The path forward was open, and it was mine to choose. "I think I've been waiting for that," I said softly, my voice full of wonder. "For something to tell me it's okay to move forward." Lisa turned to me, her expression tender but strong. Maybe that was it. We stood there, the silence between us comfortable, the weight of everything we had both endured seeming to fade away with the setting sun. The world had shifted, just for a moment, but that moment felt like everything. And as the green flash faded into memory, I realized that perhaps this was the beginning of something new, a new chapter not defined by the past but shaped by the choices we made and the love we were willing to give. What do you think of Callum's journey through betrayal and redemption? From which region are you watching this video? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories. And make sure to check out more heartwarming tales by clicking here on the end screen.